It was a bright and sunny morning when Daniel first set foot in his new neighborhood. The air was fresh, the lawns neatly trimmed, and the houses sat in perfect rows like dolls in a toy store. His family had just moved into a pristine white house at the end of the street. Daniel was the kind of child who skipped instead of walking, who laughed louder than anyone else, and whose life was filled with the thrill of discovery. That morning, as he stepped onto the school bus for his first day of school, something felt off. The bus itself was strange, unusually old, its exterior a faded shade of yellow, as though it had been sitting under the sun for far too long. The windows, cracked and dull, were streaked with dirt. When Daniel climbed aboard, the bus driver gave him a strange, hollow smile and said nothing as he took a seat by the window. The air inside was heavy with the smell of dust. The bus rattled down the street, taking a route that seemed unfamiliar to Daniel. The buildings outside looked different from the ones he'd seen in the neighborhood, like they belonged to another time. The streets were narrow and winding, and the trees on either side of the road were knotted and gnarled, as though they had been standing for centuries. There was something unsettling about it, but Daniel shook off the feeling, convincing himself it was just his imagination running wild. When the bus finally arrived at school, Daniel stepped off and looked up at the building. It was large, old, maybe too old, and the windows glinted strangely in the morning light, like eyes watching him from every direction. He shook his head, trying to rid himself of the odd thoughts swirling in his mind. It was his first day at this new school, and he was going to make it a good one. He took a deep breath and walked towards the entrance, determined to start fresh. Inside the school, everything appeared normal at first. The walls were decorated with colorful posters, and the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. He could hear the sounds of children talking and laughing as he walked down the hallway, the clatter of shoes against the polished floor echoing in the empty space. He was eager to meet his new classmates, but something caught his attention as he passed by one of the classrooms. There, standing at the front of the room, was a teacher. The teacher was mid-lesson, talking to an empty classroom as if the children were there. Her voice was soft and smooth, like she was explaining something important, but there were no students in sight. Daniel stopped for a moment, confused. Maybe she was practicing for when the class arrived. He shrugged and continued down the hallway, but something about her cold, expressionless face stayed with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in this school. When Daniel entered his classroom, he was immediately struck by the silence. The other children sat in their seats, their eyes trained forward, but there was an odd tension in the air, as if something was wrong. Some of the kids were talking over their shoulders, their voices low and conspiratorial, like they were whispering secrets to someone who wasn't there. Others giggled to themselves, but there was an edge to the laughter, something that didn't seem quite right. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. Daniel sat at his desk and tried to focus on the lesson, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around him was distracted, like their attention was split between the real world and something else, something invisible. He tried to talk to a boy sitting next to him. The boy, whose name was Luke, had messy hair and a cheeky smile, but when Daniel asked if he wanted to be friends, Luke simply smiled, his eyes darting to the side. "You're sitting in Brian's seat," he said. Confused, Daniel moved to sit across from Luke, but as he did, he noticed a strange look in the boy's eyes. It was as if he were staring at something just behind Daniel, something that wasn't there. "Hey," Daniel asked again. "What's going on with everyone? They all seem so distracted, like they're not really here." Luke leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You noticed, huh? Everyone here has an imaginary friend." Daniel blinked. He thought Luke was joking. Daniel laughed, but then the room went eerily quiet. Every single student in the class turned to look at him, their gazes sharp and calculated. It was as though their eyes were empty, like they were looking right through him. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. "You don't have one, do you?" Luke asked, his eyes darkening. "Did you get on the bus this morning? The one that looked old, like it was from another time?" Daniel nodded, unsure of where this was going.